Today I'm going to be talking, I'm in Romans chapter 1, and today we're going to be verses 7 through 15. Today we're going to be verses 7 through 15. And I talked to you last week about how we become holy when we become Christians, how we're reborn into being holy. And today I want to take this part of this letter where Paul is writing to the Romans, and the way he describes his life. You guys got to know, one of the best ways to tell about your faith is if you're changed. You know, if you come to a point in your life where you've accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior and you're living for Him, your life will be changed. You know why? The Bible says you become holy. You become holy from the inside out. So you have to decide, are you really committed to God through Jesus Christ or not? If you've really made that commitment. If it just becomes kind of a religious thing where you just kind of feel good about going to church and you're just feeling a little bit better about your life and whatever, but there's no change going on. And I'm talking from the inside out. I'm talking about legitimate, honest-to-goodness change. And by the way, Christians, if you've been Christians for a long time, you should be changing on a regular basis. That ought to be a regular part of who you are. And if there comes to points in your life where you seem to be in the middle of sin more than you're in the middle of sin normally, then you can go, you know, there's a really good sign that I'm not very close to God right now. I mean, that's the cool thing as we go along. It's not just a religious thing. The relationship thing is the thing that changes us. It changes our heart. It changes the way we look at things. It changes the way how much we want to hang out with God. It changes about how we feel about other people, including our enemies. It changes all of those things. And I know from being there that a lot of times we read the Bible and we think, well, this is a pretty cool letter from Paul, or this is a pretty good thing written by James or Peter or the Old Testament or whatever. We look at that and we go, but that's not me. This is just something I'm studying about who the ultimate holy Christian is supposed to be. No, it's you. It's you. And the amazing thing about our faith is this: we have faith in the unseen, and it will come out in the fruit of the seen. People will see that you're changed. They'll know that something's different about you. You'll know, your wife will know, your family will know. You'll just be different. And that's a gauge. You can look at yourself and say, am I any different than I was before? And if you're not, there's either a distance between you and God because of the sin that you've got in your life, or you've even got to ask yourself, am I really saved? Am I really changed? Do you change instantly to become the perfect holy Christian? No, you don't. But there are things in your life that you know you got to change. There are things in your life that you know you've got to do different. You got to parent different. You got to do relationships different. You've got to do your job different. You got all of those things. So that's really important. So we look at Paul, and I want to just remind you of, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on who Paul was, but I want you to realize how much he's changed. He's writing this letter, and let's just start off with verse 7 on your notes there. He says, I'm writing to all of you in Rome who are loved by God and are called to be His, say it with me, holy people. I don't know about you, but that still kind of sounds weird to me. But look, when we become Christians, we are. And that means you've been set aside to do the work of God. And are you doing that or not? That's what you got to ask yourself, because you really do have a choice. It's not that you haven't been made holy if you've really made that decision, because God doesn't force us to do the right thing. Don't you hate being forced to do the right thing? I don't know about you, but I hate being behind somebody on the road. It just bugs me. Not that I ever speed or anything, but if there's somebody in front of me going 30, I can't go 35, whether I want to or not. I mean, I'm being forced. Nobody likes that, so God doesn't do that. God will discipline you sometimes, and He can justly do that because He's God. But you've got to realize that God has given us choices all the time. Now here's Paul, who used to be Saul, and I don't know if you realize this, but we would call Saul today a terrorist. Saul was a terrorist. He wasn't just a bad guy. He took bad guy to the next level. When you take bad guy and you decide, okay, I'm this guy because I'm trying to do it to honor God, it becomes a much higher level of terror, and Because those people are willing to die for it because they believe the reward. So here's Paul, here's Saul, who is studying he's studying behind one of the great rabbis of that time, and he's getting ready to be the next. He's working his way up to the top. And I just wrote down a couple things. These aren't on your notes. If you want to see who Saul is that we're writing, most of the New Testament is written by, then go in and look at the book of Acts and you'll see most of it in there. But let me just read you a couple things. Saul was there when the first Christian martyr happened. Stephen, who was one of the disciples, was preaching and talking about Jesus, and they're telling these disciples to quit. Y'all got to quit doing that. They're trying to squelch this new faith that's growing, and they're trying to squelch it. So Stephen just keeps on and on and on. And then the Bible, Acts 7:58 says, they dragged Stephen out of the city and began to stone him. His accusers took off their coats, and they laid them at the feet of a young man named Saul's holding these guys' coats so they can throw the rocks. Saul's one of the spiritual leaders that's given them the permission. Acts 7:59 says, as they stone him, and I think the martyrdom of Stephen, I have to think that God used that in a great way in Paul's life. Because what you have to realize is the things you go through in life, what we have to realize is our witness that we have to each other and to other people is so important. But y'all remember, do you remember what happened when Stephen died? Stephen is getting stoned. And he's not giving up. Right before they kill him, he starts preaching. Right before they're holding rocks and they're mad at him. They're probably like just an angry mob, and they've got permission. They believe in God's eyes that they should be killing this guy because he's starting this new religion. And Stephen sits there and he starts telling the story about Jesus. He starts telling the good news, and they're hammering him and they're hammering him and hammering him. And right before Stephen died, he prayed this. The guys are watching him, and he's like down on the ground, and he looks up to God and he says, kind of what Jesus said. Father, I give you my spirit. Father, forgive them. And then the Bible says, as he's being crushed by rocks and going to the ground, he's got a grin on his face. They could tell he's looking at something that's not there. He's looking at the unseen, the thing that he's been believing in, the faith. All of a sudden, it's like heaven opens up for him, and he sees it, and he knows where he's going, and the dude dies with a smile on his face in a brutal, brutal, brutal death. And then it says in Acts chapter 1, the very next verse after 7:59, that Saul was one of the witnesses, and he agreed completely to the killing of Stephen. So this is who we're dealing with. We're dealing with a guy that's a terrorist. But what we've got to realize is when we become Christians and when God changes us through Jesus Christ, He changes us. He changes us and He makes us holy. And the next thing I've got on your notes there is there's only one way to be holy. It's from the inside out. Matter of fact, Jesus chewed out the Jewish leaders because they were working so hard on being perfect on the outside and judging everybody for not doing that. He said, guys, you work so hard on the outside and your inside is rotting out. That's paraphrased. The only way to be holy is to be changed from the inside out, and that comes through Jesus. 1 Peter 2:9 says, he just got through saying this is how the world lives. And he says, but you are not like that. You are a chosen people. You realize that? As a Christian, when I was a kid and I'd play sports and we'd split up to make teams, I always wanted to be the captain. You know why? I didn't want to get picked last. I had this great fear of being picked last. So I always wanted to be the Christian. I'm a Christian. I always wanted to be the Christian too. I always wanted to be the captain. But you know what? You're chosen. You're chosen by the King of Kings, the King of the universe, the all-powerful, all-knowing God. You've been chosen. You're a chosen people. You're royal priests. You're a holy nation. For him to say you're royal priests, remember, they had high priests that represented them. They didn't even have direct connection with God. They had this high priest that represented them. He says, you've become now a royal priest. You are a holy nation. You're God's very own possession. And as a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. So Paul writes, it's interesting. We don't think much about it because we've had the Bible, These guys, they have the Old Testament, they have scrolls, and it's been taught to them and everything, but they don't have the New Testament. So you know what Paul does when he's teaching these guys? Paul goes, look, you need to be like me. Now, this is a guy that they were all terrorized about just a little while ago. And now Paul's going, look, if you're going to live the life of faith, you've got to be like me. What I'm doing for you is I'm showing you, thank you very much, I'm showing you how you're supposed to go about living your life, and you've got to, you just look at me and be like me. Galatians 4:12, he says, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to live as I do in freedom from these things, freedom from the law and freedom from doing all the things that we're not supposed to do, because I have become like you Gentiles, free from those laws. He's saying, be like me. He says, don't be like them. He's saying, don't be like the Jewish people who are living under these laws that just weighed them down all the time, because they don't have to be that way anymore. They've been changed. But he says, and he says, don't be like the rest of the world underneath the laws of the world and the temptations and all that we've got. Be like me. We're going to look at Paul, and just from what he wrote here, at what a holy person should look like, okay? So you'll be able to know what the life of a holy person should look like. I'm going to give you, I think, 8 things to help you be able to go, if I'm living my life as a holy person, these are the things. If I'm going to be like Paul, because he's writing this letter, then this is the way I need to be. Number 1, you ready? Thankful. Number 1 is thankful. If I'm going to live the life of a holy person, then I've got to be thankful. Verse 8 says, let me say first that I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith in him is being talked about all the world. 1 Thessalonians 5:18, the Apostle Paul writes, be thankful in all circumstances. Now, what do you think that means? What do you think being thankful in all circumstances means? It means being thankful what? In all circumstances. See, I ask trick questions all the time. You know what that means? It means everything. It means when you're going through the bad times. It means when your kid gets off track. It means when you lose your job. It means when you get that promotion. It means when you're sick. It means if you can learn to be thankful. Now, if you've done it, would you agree with me? Doesn't it change everything? Doesn't, when you're sitting in the middle of everything and everything's just coming down around you, and if all of a sudden you can change to an attitude of thankful, doesn't that change everything? It takes the anxiety away. It changes things. It changes things greatly. I've had times at night where I've told you all this, and I'm sure it's the same with a lot of you. At night time is when the bad gets bad. When it's dark and it's quiet, and when you're laying there in the dark, everything seems huge. And I've had times where I'm just laying there sweating, and all of a sudden I'll start thinking about being thankful and the things that I'm thankful about. And dude, if my teeth were white enough, all of a sudden you'd see them just glowing in the room, because all of a sudden this feeling of joy just comes over me, because I start thanking him. I start thanking him for the opportunity. See, Paul says here, Paul's not just thankful for the things that God's done in his life. He's thankful for the faith of these Roman believers. Remember, we read what they were going through. Terrible, terrible, terrible. He's so thankful for that. He's thankful for their witness. Look what it says. Now remember, this is a group of people that's not very large, but they're making a pretty big impact on the city of Rome, and that's why they're being so aggressively gone after, because it's not like they're just some little group out there that's not, you wonder why Christians are being persecuted all the time. One is we're being persecuted because a lot of us are idiots, but number 2, we're being persecuted because we're making a difference. And then there's these other faiths out there that don't make much of a difference, and nobody pays much attention to them at all. But here's these people in Rome people are watching them die like Stephen and not giving up the name of Christ. They're seeing it. And Paul says, I'm just so thankful for that. He says, I'm so thankful about that, I'm thankful for your obedience. I'm thankful for the fruit. By the way, you know what the number one key to your knowing, to making your faith work is? Obedience. You know, if somebody asks you, are you a person of faith? Yeah, I believe in Jesus Christ. Well, I think the right answer would be, yeah, I obey the teachings of Jesus. See how that's different? There's a whole lot of people. The devil believes in Jesus and shakes at the mention of his name, but he didn't obey anything, and he's going to suffer for that for eternity because of that. So the first thing is he's thankful. He's so thankful for what God's done, and he's thankful the way God is using these people. And I think it's so important that I think it's important that we're praying for the other churches, that we're praying for other Christians, that we're praying for the Christians in other places, the places in the world that are being martyring and everything. I think it's very important that we're thankful for that. And the number two thing that a holy person does is they're prayerful. They're prayerful or full of prayer. That just becomes a regular part of their life. Look at verse 9. God knows how often I pray for you. God knows how often I pray for you. Look what it says. How often does he pray for them? Day and night I bring you and your needs to pray for God, in prayer to God, whom I serve with all my heart, by spreading the good news about His Son. He's constantly praying for these other Christians so that they can serve and they can do what God wants them to do and continue in their witness. And that's just something that continual prayer is something that some of you in here, the spiritual gift that God gave you when you became a Christian was the ability to pray for other people. And for some people, that's an actual spiritual gift. You know them. They're always saying they're praying for you. Their prayers seem to be getting answered all the time. There are certain people in my life that when I need prayer, I call them. Because I know they're not just going to say they're going to pray for me and then never hear from them again. They're going to follow up a week later and say, how's such and such going? But we've got to get into this attitude of continual prayer all the time. I just wrote down a few things that I think continual prayer does for you. First of all, when you're praying about being a witness, a carrier of the good news, you'll look for ways to honor God and give God credit. If you're constantly praying, you walk into Starbucks and you go, God, I want to represent you well here today. You walk into the office and you go to your cubicle, you go, God, I just want to be a good representative for you here today. I want to witness to you. I want to bring glory to you. You know, it changes the way you go about doing everything. It changes the way you make your decisions and the way you treat people and the way you treat people that are angry at you. Look, you got somebody at work that you just can't stand, and you've been praying, Lord, please hit them with a bus. Change that to, Lord, would you please bless that person? You've got to remember that hurting people hurt people. That jerk at your office, he's only a jerk we're not born jerks. He's a jerk because there's something messed up inside. Instead of being praying that he gets fired or whatever, start praying that you can be a good friend to that person. Start praying that you can be a good witness to that person. Look, that will change the way you do everything. It will give you a patience and a kindness and a forgiveness and things that you've never had with that person. As a matter of fact, you've got a job that you hate. Start praying that when you show up at that job that you might be at that job that you hate and you're wondering why God hasn't answered your prayer to get you out of there. It's because He's going, look, until you do what you're supposed to do there, you're hanging there. You're there. You might as well just fix your attitude and be who you're supposed to be. That's what people notice. People don't notice you jumping on them because they're drinking too much or whatever. People notice that your life is different because you're following Jesus Christ. They see the love and the patience and the kindness and all that. And then the other thing about when you're in the middle of continual prayer all the time, you'll find out that God's going to use different strengths and talents than you thought you ever had. God's going to use you in ways that you didn't think. You thought you needed to be here for God to use you, and God was going, no, look, Royal, if you'll just start working here where I've got you right here, then I'm going to take care of things. And you end up even going a different direction than you even thought, because you get into God's will. The more you're in continual prayer, the more you get to know God, and you get to know God's will. God's will also has a different time frame than yours. I can't tell you how many people that just, I believe there's so many people that have just quit on God and missed out. They might have been like right here. It might have been like the next step, but they just stop. And what happens is if you get to know God's will, then you develop a hope that will help you persevere. When we started Life Connection Church, Lisa and I went to this little conference thing where they helped us decide whether that's what our calling was and all that. And there was about 12 pastors in there, maybe. Within a couple of years, we were the only church still around. Who knows how many pastors just quit, and God's blessing is just on the other step, just the next step. It's important that the more you know God's will, you keep going forward. And God will use different jobs and different opportunities, and He might use someone else for that person. My dad died of ALS, and as he was getting sick, I just was really nervous about his salvation. And I kept praying about it. It was really making me nervous. And one night before he was supposed to go into a procedure, that the doctor said, if this procedure doesn't go right, he could die on the table. And I just freaked out. And I went up to the church and I got a tract. And I took it and drove to Irving to my dad's house and knocked on the door and went in and said, Dad, I just need to talk. Can I just read this to you? And I knew the Bible pretty well by then. I'd been in ministry and I was a counselor. But I was so nervous talking to my dad, I just felt like I had to get it right. So I took the tract and I sat down and I said, I just need to read this to you. And I read to him about his salvation, and I think it had the Roman road on it and all that. And I got through and I looked up and I said, Dad, are you okay with that? I mean, what do you say to your dad, right? And he said, I'm good. I'm good with all that. And I said, are you sure? My dad never went to church or anything. Are you sure, Dad? You might die tomorrow. Are you sure? And he said, yeah, yes, son. It was one of those poor little son thinks I'm not saved, And I just didn't feel right about it. And I kept praying about it. And Lisa and the kids were over there one day as Dad got farther along, and he wasn't too far away from his death. And a man knocked on the front door that used to work with my dad. And my dad hadn't seen him in years. How long, Lisa? 20 years or so? And he said, my dad's name was Royal. He said, Royal, I heard you're really sick and you're going to die, and there's just some things I need to ask you. And apparently the guy was going to seminary or something. And he came in, and Lisa and the kids went in the kitchen, and there was a little blinds where you could close. Nobody could see in there, but you could hear whatever they were saying. And the man led my dad to the Lord. So here's the deal. If you just pray, God works things out different than you would even think He would work things out. With everything you do, when you're going about doing God's will, He wants to work it out, and He wants to have the glory. And if you're just open to His will, He's going to do things that are going to blow you away. So we've got to be thankful if we're holy. We've got to be prayerful. And we've also got to be all in. All in. When I talk to somebody about getting baptized, or when they've made a decision for Christ, or they're asking me, they don't know why their faith just isn't working. They don't know why God's not doing this. And, I ask something like, are you all in? Is your work life in? Is your recreation life in? Is everything you do, is it all about finding God's will and giving Him glory? It's all in. In 9b verse, it says, prayer to God whom I serve with what? All of my heart. What he's saying is, there's not anything that I do that I'm not doing it to spread the gospel. Nothing. Every single thing I do, everything I do, there's a motive to go with it. It's not to glorify me, but it's to glorify God. And you've got to ask yourself, am I all in? Because if you're not, you're missing out. And you're going to have an anxiety about your faith till the day you die. And you may really be a Christian and you're going to go to heaven, but don't you want to live out some heaven while you're here? So we're thankful, we're prayerful if we're holy. We're also all in. And number 4, we care about God and others more than we care about ourselves. We care about God and others more than we care about ourselves. And you might write right beside that, put other-centered. Other-centered, because the natural human thing is to be self-centered. But a holy person cares about God and His will and the needs of others more than he cares about himself. He's other-centered, not self-centered. We live in a world that we're constantly told all the time. I can't tell you, I watch it on the social media. It's all about feeling good about yourself. You deserve to win. You deserve this. And baloney. We deserve to die. You know why we're special? Because Jesus Christ died for us. That's the only way we're special. And we didn't deserve that, because the Bible said while we were still sinners, He died for us. You know? I mean, that's where our value comes from. And what He teaches us is just the same thing He did. Jesus said, I'm not as important as you are, and the Father is. So I'm being obedient, and I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to live this horrific, poor life as a human being, and then I'm going to carry out God's will, and I'm going to die a brutal death. Because He loved God and He loved us more than He loved Himself. See, that's how we've got to live our life. And the difference in the world's thinking about how important you are and a holy person is that the world says to be proud about who you are. But God says be humble about who you are, because you were gifted while you were still rebelling against the gifter. Isn't that amazing? Doesn't that change your whole perspective on things? Verse 10, he says, one of the things that I always pray about is the opportunity, is the opportunity, God willing, for me to come and see you. Now realize, Paul not only was a Jew, he was also a Roman citizen. So that put him in a very different category. He was excited. It was like Rome was his hometown. That would be like me going, I want to go to Irving and tell everybody, you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's what, plus Rome was right smack in the middle of, it was everything in the world went through Rome. So the interesting thing, we talk about how God does things different than we expect Him to do things. Paul kept praying that God would send him to Rome as a preacher. He sent him to Rome as a prisoner. And God works things out different. While he was a prisoner, he got to talk to people that were higher ups, and before you know it, Christianity's going through Rome like crazy, because Paul wasn't just standing out on a corner preaching. He was talking to the higher ups. Because he was a Roman citizen, they gave him a certain amount of respect, and they listened to him. Paul says, one of the things I always pray for is the opportunity to come and see you, because I long to visit you so that I can bring you some spiritual gift that will help you grow strong in the Lord. This isn't the spiritual gift like we'll read about later in Romans or in 1 Corinthians, the spiritual gift we get from the Holy Spirit when we become Christians. This is bringing them the spiritual gift of wisdom. This is teaching them. This is a man who's very experienced now at living out his life of faith, and he's bringing it to rub it off on other people. That's what our job is. That's one of the main reasons it's important as Christians that we're together, is so we rub off on each other. It's so that we can show what living a life of faith is all about. A person who's holy is thankful, they're prayerful, they're all in, they're other-centered, and they're also generous. They're also generous. It's about giving and not getting. Look what Paul says. He says, he's just talking, man, I just love this. He's saying, I just love this. He says, when we get together, I want to encourage you in your faith. That's what I want to do more than anything. You know, that's what I live for on Sunday morning. But you know what else I live for? I live for you encouraging me. And I'm not weird because of that. That's what Paul says. He says, when we get together, I want to encourage you in your faith, but I also want to be encouraged by yours. I love hearing y'all's God stories. Vet came in this morning and told me a God story that happened at his office this last week. They've been trying to get these parts in. It wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. And finally, Vet stopped worrying about it. He sat down and prayed about it and just felt a peace about it. And he said the next day a guy walks in and the order had come in. I mean, it just changed everything and took all of his worries away. Look, I'll make you a promise. If you want to go back and listen to this later, or here we go. If you'll come here with the attitude of I'm here to give, your church community experience will be better than it ever has been before. If you'll come here, I'm not just talking about money here. I'm talking about if you come here knowing, look, when you miss church, you miss ministering to somebody. You do. Now, I'm not just talking about the regular serving stuff like all the people that serve in the children's ministry and the serve in the hospitality and serve in the greeters and serve in here and serve with what we do. I'm talking about the community that comes that we get from each other. That's why we think the small groups are so important. I think it's so important. But if you'll come with an attitude to give, because I'll tell you something, as soon as you come with the attitude to get, when you don't feel like you're getting it, your attitude about the whole church will change. Guys, one of the hardest things for me to get over when I became a pastor, and we've been doing this now for almost 12 years, was people that one week absolutely loved the church and the next week they're talking bad about us. And it's all because something changed. And this happened with me. There was a point in my life when I was on staff at another church, and remember, I told you, from the time I recommitted my life to the Lord at 27, I was in church like every single time the doors open. I just couldn't wait to get there. It's just something that I lived for, even before I did this for a living. And I remember I was on staff at this local church, and our pastor had resigned, and our church was like, we had like 5 factions. We had the group of people that wanted our leadership to take us to being more charismatic. We had the ones that wanted us to be more Baptist. We had the ones that wanted us to be more this, more that. And I mean, there was like 5 different groups of people. And all of a sudden, this community of church that I loved it was all these people wanting what they want. I want to get what I want. I want to get, we had people quit that church when we built the new building because we didn't put a center aisle for weddings. That's how crazy it gets. And I remember one day walking into church, the first time in all my years of being a committed Christian, and telling God I hated being there. I said, I moped around that day, and everybody asked me what was wrong, and I just did my thing, and I was on staff, so I was supposed to be the holy one. And I remember that night I got home, and about midnight, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I got my keys to the church, and I drove to the church, and I went into the main worship center and went up and turned just enough light on that you could see the front of the stage and the stairs, and they had a lot higher upstairs. And I remember I went and I knelt down at those stairs, and I looked up. We had a stained glass thing with a cross, and I just looked up and said, I hate this, God. What's happened? I don't want to be here anymore. It doesn't feel like you're here anymore. You know what I was saying? I'm not getting. For the first time in years, I was saying, I'm not getting. And God's never talked to me in an audible voice, and He's never written anything on the wall, but He so clearly told me, Royal, the difference is you. I'm still there. And I got up. That was a Saturday night. I got up, went to church on Sunday morning, and I was back to loving church. We still had 5 factions. We still didn't know who our next pastor was going to be. It was still brutal with some of the stuff that was going on. But my attitude was different. I mean, your attitude in your worship is what's going to affect every single thing that you do. So I promise you, if you'll have this attitude of I'm here to give, if you'll just go, look, I got to be at church on Sunday because I got a job. It may not be that I'm working in the children's area today, or it may not be that I'm doing this, but there may be somebody there that needs my smile really bad when they walk in the door. There may be somebody there that was a guest last week and they're coming this week and they're waiting to see if you're still there smiling at them. See, I promise you, if you will come to church, if you will participate in being part of the Life Connection Church family and going, you know, I'm here to give. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to give. Can I promise you something? You will get. But if your attitude is I'm here to get, you're never going to give, and you're going to leave as soon as you start getting. Stop getting. Does that make sense? I know I spent some time on that, but I've watched it for too many years now, over and over and over and over again. So we're thankful, we're prayerful, we're all in, we're other-centered, we're generous. And then number 6, this is so important, we're hopeful and we never give up. We're hopeful and we never give up. Perseverance comes from hope. You give up because you don't have hope anymore. That's what happens when a person gets deep down, dark into depression. What happens is they quit because they don't have hope. And our hope comes from our faith. Our hope comes as we go about following Christ. Look what Paul says. Paul says, now y'all realize, and we'll probably do some more discussion about all the stuff that Paul went through, his jail terms and shipwrecks and everything else he went through while he was going out there doing God's work for him. And he says, I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to visit you, but I was prevented until now. I want to work among you and see spiritual fruit, just as I have seen among other Gentiles. Paul wanted to go to Rome, and God changed his direction. He wanted to go to Rome. God changed his direction. He wanted to go to Rome. That was just, when you're reading his writings, you're thinking, he's doing all this stuff and he's constantly thinking about he wants to go to Rome. And then boom, all of a sudden he goes to Rome as a prisoner. He goes to Rome changed. And God worked it out and did it in his time. And Paul didn't give up. So we're thankful, we're prayerful, we're all in, we're other-centered, we're generous, we're hopeful. And number 7, you ready for this? We're obligated. We're obligated. Don't you feel like when somebody does something for you, you know, your neighbor comes over and mows your yard? Like that happens all the time. Don't you feel like don't you feel like you're obligated? Huh? I mean, it's weird. It's weird. I was thinking this morning, this is so weird, and I just think weird things, but I don't know how to respond when somebody thanks me for doing what I do. I mean, I'm doing what I love, and I'm serving God, and I know that God's given me the grace and the power and everything I need to do that. And when somebody thanks me, a lady yesterday said, I just want to thank you for what you write on your blog. It really ministers to me. And I go, I don't know what to say. Because I feel like it's not anything I do. It's like I feel like I can't take credit for that. Isn't that weird? Because I'm a people pleaser. There's nothing I like more than a pat on the back. You know, if I come mow your yard, you better tell me thank you. But when it comes to doing this work of God, it's just, and I got to thinking, I laid in bed last night thinking, how do I respond to that? And then I thought about the employees at Chick-fil-A who always say, my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Now, I think that sounds cheesy, but it's true. It's my pleasure. That's not giving me any credit. It's not saying, oh, thank you, I'm really, really good at that. It's not anything like that. It's my pleasure. And that's what happens when we feel the obligation that comes with being thankful to Jesus Christ for what He did. What should be coming for us, instead of taking that for granted, what should be coming from us is a sense of what? Obligation. You know, you've heard for, the people that are given more, then it's expected more, right? We should have this sense of obligation. For I have a great sense of obligation, he says, to people. He says, both in the civilized world and the rest of the world. In some of your translations it says both to the Greek and the non-Greek, because the Greek were considered civilized and everybody else was country bumpkins. To the educated and the uneducated alike. Our obligation should be that we're living out our faith at the office, at home, on the softball field, anywhere we go, with the obligation of we're there to serve God, we're there to encourage other believers, we're there to focus on giving glory to God and taking the message everywhere. So the last one, we're thankful, we're prayerful, we're all in, we're other-centered, we're generous, we're hopeful, we're obligated. And number 8, a holy person has a constant sense of urgency for other people to know. A constant sense of urgency for others to know. He says, so I am eager to come to you in Rome to preach the good news. Now, this often scares people to death because they think of what I do standing up in front of people and speaking, or what gifted evangelists do that show up on your door knocking, or, and those kind of things scare them to death. Let me tell you something. You're going to get a whole lot more play if you're the Christian you're supposed to be around the people you work with and around your next door neighbor. And you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's what it's all about. We're obligated, and we should have this urgency. We should have this urgency to be ministering to other people and for other people to come to know the Lord. So we're about to have communion.